Good afternoon, everybody. And how are you first? What do you prefer by me, an informal attitude or the formal one? Of course, I have a speech, no doubt. And I have to say that I'm obliged to read it because, of course, the ministry, as usual, prepare always a speech to be delivered by anyone. And I'm obliged to read it because otherwise, of course, there will be have some troubles, let's say, But anyway, before, of course, let's say, entry into details concerning, let's say, the general outline of the Italian foreign policy, as far as us is concerned, because, of course, I'm fond of Asia, and Asia is within my domain, let's say, within the ministry. Let me thank, first of all, Ambassador Battani for, let's say, we exaggerated quite a bit in saying all these words, let's say, in my favor. Of course, something is true, something is totally untrue. I have the privilege of working with him. And I spent 3 wonderful years, let's say, along with him, between 1997 and 2000. And he was my mentor, I have to say. And I recognize this, I acknowledge without no problem at all, because during this period, I learned all the lessons he was able to, let's say, to give me. And I thank you very much for this, because I utilized so much and extensively his experience, let's say, during my period at the Prime Minister's office, when I, let's say, had the chance of being appointed, let's say, diplomatic advisor to the Prime Minister, and as well, the important role of special representative of the Prime Minister for the G8 and G20. It was a unique experience, no doubt. It was an extremely challenging post, probably the most important one within our diplomatic service. Now, let me say something, let's say, before reading the paper. I told you before because I'm obliged to do. What's the essence of diplomacy today? What does it mean being a diplomat, in other words? It's a complex story, and it could be a success story, of course. Diplomacy changed quite a lot. And you have the opportunity of talking to diplomats, have many discussions with them, try to learn, let's say, the essence, the spirit, what they're going to say to you. But at the end, what's very important, it's the final message. And diplomacy now changed a lot because globalization forces us to think differently. I'm supposed to be quite ironic, but I remember that when I was young, before entering, let's say, before passing the examination, entering, let's say, the foreign service, I was told that, of course, the foreign service was something in the Navy. Join the Navy and see the world, they say. And I joined the foreign service, and in fact, I saw the world. But I remember perfectly, as today, that I read a book written by a Venetian, Daniele Varè, who was a diplomat, an Italian one, but he was, let's say, of English mother tongue, because his mother was an English. And he wrote this book in English. It was translated, let's say, into Italian. It was published firstly, let's say, the first edition appeared in, if I well remember, 1941. He told his story. He recollected his memories, and the essence, the message of this book, which could be considered, according to me, really Bible for the young diplomats before entering, let's say, before passing even the examination, let's say, of the foreign service. To be ironic, well, the book is called The Laughing Diplomat. Why laughing? Because during a dinner, was, let's say, in the year 1901, in Berlin, he was there, sat around the table before some events to be played, let's say, later on. There was some, useful kind discussions, let's say, among, of course, the people gathered around the table itself. And at a certain point, a young lady told this diplomat, you have to laugh more, because you have to learn that first, You have to laugh about, of course, yourself and about the people around you. So the message first is to be ironic and to be more pragmatic. Pragmatism is important today for diplomacy. Diplomacy has changed quite a lot because I would say that, you know, first was policy, now is economy, now is trade, now is diplomacy for growth. That's our first aim at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And that will introduce the speech itself, let's say in the written form. But before, I would like to tell you how it's important, let's say, to be pragmatic, to understand the mood, the sweeping changes in the world, and try to adapt your mentality to all these changes, let's say, around us. So that's probably the most important challenge for a diplomat today, because once abroad, you have the opportunity of meeting a lot of people, making a lot of discussions, leading many negotiations, let's say, for any kind of agreements, no matter agreements it is. Of course, it's always important, it's always difficult. But humanity and contacts and the possibility of gathering and getting acquainted with a lot of people, let's say, around the world, it's important because you know them. And once you know them, you understand their mentality, their culture, and so their habits. That's important. And that will lead me to say to you that diplomacy now, the key word for diplomacy, I told you, is trade and growth. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we're trying to do this. We are living under very bad circumstances due, of course, to the financial crisis. What happened, of course? No very high standard of living, great difficulties for entrepreneurs of having some kind of outward-looking mentality. They prefer to stay behind, to wait for a while, and they are going to lose the most important thing for an entrepreneur, the risk. Our job is probably important, let's say, in convincing these people to go abroad. It seems easy to say, much more difficult to do. I paid a trip, let's say, an official one in last July. It was in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Singapore. I met many Italian entrepreneurs. And I realized this, that of course there are some important Italian firms which are consistently present, let's say, and established in the country, of course, of residence. But at the end, the problem is that once our ambassador tried to convey the right message to the right people, above all in Italy, to go abroad, to explore, to work, to risk, they are, you know, interested in what you're going to say to them. But at the end, there are some problems in understanding the real message. And so convincing these people to go abroad is important because we try to be much more dynamic rather than to be much more, you know, stable and firm. You know, it's a comprehensible attitude, no doubt. Because of course, in this period, which is difficult, no doubt, we may be understanding, let's say, all the position taken by our entrepreneurs. But our effort, playing this field, is try to convince them to be much more proactive towards what's happening, let's say, outside the Italian borders. And so let me say that, so that's my brief remarks, because trying to say to you first, my job, the essence of diplomacy today, the importance of understanding each other, getting acquainted with each other, know each other, and try to be, to have a pragmatic, and why not even an ironic attitude towards people, towards the outside world. And work very hard in these directions, in order for us to be much more proactive towards, of course, our future. And I pay tribute to the role, of course, played by this university, which is a real success story, which Ambassador Battani is president of this university, turned into a real success story, along with, of course, his friends, all the people working with him. And I realized that's a great reality, it's a true reality. And also the credit room will pave the way, let's say, to new successes, let's say, in the future, and new challenges, you know, for you. And I'm very happy to be here. And I told you, among the areas involving to this unique and innovative university network, of course, there is Asia. I'm fond of Asia because, let's say, it's a complicated matter. Well, I don't remember when I started myself thinking that Asia could be not only the future, but even the present. I don't know, I don't exactly remember, let's say, when I started thinking this, but I realized that it was important so much for Italy to be much more present in this continent, rather than being, let's say, within the national borders. And from that time on, I tried to convince people around me in my office to work hard in these directions. That's why I decided to pay this visit, let's say, the end of July, last July, in these three countries, try to give the first signals in these directions, which seems so easy, but believe me, it isn't at all. Why? Because, of course, once you realize the importance of this, you have to convince the people working with you how much is important what you're going to do. It seems really easy, but believe me, it isn't at all. It's a psychological problem sometimes. It's really a psychological problem because, you know, you have tried to create a trend, a real trend from a psychological point of view. Once you got it, once you got it this, you can say mission accomplished. Before this, it's impossible at all. And so I decided, and I asked myself, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, being in charge of Asia, because I realized the importance of the continent. And I realized the importance of connecting diplomacy, growth, and Asia. These three elements are really interlinked, according to me. So that's why I went in Southeast Asia, and I scheduled other missions, let's say, before the end of the year. Of course in China, of course in Japan. But why not in Southeast Asia at all? I think about, for example, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Thailand. So the first impression I got, I received once I was there, let's say some months ago, there is, you know, a great scope, a great interest, all these countries, let's say, towards Italy. The problem is to convince our people to be there. And so this factor is important, and that's why when I was there, I realized that the Italian firms which were with me were so happy of this because they didn't remember at all, you know, in the past, when was the last mission paid by an Italian authorities in the region. It seems that I was told, for example, that for the last foreign minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, was roughly, I would say, 10, 15 years ago. The last prime minister was in 97, 98, and Ambassador Battani was with him, you know. You remember, 98, he was, I was, at that time, I was working, let's say, in the Secretary General office. So what does it mean? It means that, of course, we had tried to reorient our foreign policy priorities. So that's the point, that's the essence, that's the message. That's why I'm so, you know, convinced and keen on this point. And I'm a strong supporter, let's say, of relaunching, of course, all the activities and relations with the continent. Because there is a real cultural heritage to be exploited there in Southeast Asia above all, as far as Italy is concerned. And you realize this, but you realize this when you are there, not when you are here. And that's really crucial, of a crucial importance. So we have so many meetings with high-level institutional representatives, during which, of course, we highlighted their interest for Italy, both from the political and the economic point of view, and that will pave the way, so that's the point, pave the way for a further consolidation on our relations between Italy, of course, and the opening of new perspectives. So that's important for business purposes. Once you have the point that, and that's of course, once and for all, sure, that we are living under very difficult circumstances due to the financial crisis, which is, of course, we are in the middle of nowhere probably, or trying to go out, trying to escape from this very bad situation, but at the end, it's not over at all. There are, you know, in front of us, there are something to be done once again. And so, that's why the government decided to rearrange this priority, and that's, for example, it's important, I will tell you, in October 2014, we will host in Milan the Asia-Europe Meeting Summit of Heads of State and Government, whose theme will be linked to sustainable growth. Thus, will create, let's say, a strong synergy with Expo 2015, Feeding the Planet, Energy for Life. And I would say that all the multifaceted global challenges, whose analysis is included in your courses, are an important part of our dialogue with one of the most important global actors, which is, of course, China, no doubt. We have really untapped potentials, I would say, with China, but in the region as a whole. So that's why we are going to look China as a true strategic partner, and our initiatives as United Nations and G20 members, as well in other international fora, are largely in tune. I was in China last time, 2011, and I met my counterpart, my G20 colleague, my G20 Sherpa. He was at the time the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and of course the Chinese Foreign Minister. And so we realized that we have so much in common. We have tried to, step up all these issues and try to create a common basis, a common platform, a common background in which we can work, in which can establish a new trend for the future. So that's why Farnesina, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, we're going to carry out all these activities in close and really constant coordination with all relevant national institutions, with the aim to deepen and broaden the scope of our relations with China. These relations, of course, encompasses political, economic, and cultural, scientific, technological ties. And I do believe that it will grow stronger and stronger in the near future, thanks to our joint efforts. We made a lot with China. We had a strategic partnership, which of course is perfectly running and working, starting in 2004. This partnership received a considerable boost, I would say, in 2010, and after the well-known celebrations of the 40th anniversary of our diplomatic ties. And we also signed a triennial action plan to strengthen bilateral economic cooperation. This plan provides a real wide framework for the Italy-China Committee, which, chaired by the two Ministers of Foreign Affairs and including all public administrations involved, will drive and coordinate all initiatives at a governmental level between the two countries. This partnership itself, between Italy and China, can be better understood analyzing figures. It will be important to give you some figures at all for the end. So you have, the amount and the exchange, and you have some snapshots on this concerning the economic relations, for example. Between 2001 and 2011, the trade between Italy and China has increased at an average rate of 13.8% per year, reaching almost $42 billion in 2012. It's increasing in volume, it's improving in quality, it's also contributing to the reductions of our persistent trade deficit. This is a positive trend, which is confirmed by the data on the first quarter 2013, when Italian exports have increased by 3.5% compared to the same period of 2012, placing Italy in fourth position among EU export countries after Germany, France, and the Netherlands. Let's talk about investments, because of course it's, it's a crucial point. We have some Eurostat data in 2012. The stock of Italian foreign direct investments in China amounted at 6.3 billion euros, while China invested only 319 million euros in our country. So you know the imbalance, which is really huge, I would say. And this underlines, of course, the great asymmetry, which still feature and characterize bilateral investments and represents one of the areas on which we are focusing our efforts. In the next few months, we have two important events which should contribute, no doubt, to strengthen our partnership with China. The first is the renewal of the action plan for the years 2014-2016. We will increase the number of priority areas for bilateral economic cooperation, adding to more sectors to those of trade and investments. Small and medium enterprises, which, it's the real axis of the, system, the Italian economic, production system. Sorry, the microphone will be destroyed sooner or later. And scientific and technological cooperation and environmental protection. The second event is the fifth plenary meeting of the Italy-China Governmental Committee, which we are willing to hold in Rome before the end, if possible, of this year. So we propose in this field the creation of working groups within the Bilateral Economic Commission, which will deal with small and medium enterprises, in particular credit access and investments, trade and infrastructures, as well as innovation issues. At the same time, at national level, the Italian government is strongly committed to improve the framework to create proper business environment to attract Chinese firms and, above all, Chinese investments. Of course, there is a problem in Italy, it's bureaucracy, and we are trying to do a very hard job in these directions because, of course, if you have to convince someone to invest more in Italy, you have to present, an attractive world, which is not, of course, Alice in Wonderland, no doubt, but at the end, you should do your best to convince them that, they can work, they can live, they can do things, they can be, happy living under and in this country. Bureaucracy, of course, is a monster, no doubt. Simplification, standardization are, of course, key words in Europe as a whole. There are huge amount of papers saying a lot extensively in these fields. But at the end, so you have no great results at all. Because of course you can see, of course, daily life, in your daily life, routine life, how much bureaucracy will affect you. And that's important to be understood this. Because at the end, if you're trying to reduce it, you will be able to have more positive effects on the economic balance. So that's the final results. That's the final challenge. That's the final target. Easy to say, much more difficult to do, as usual, of course. But on the other hand, if you have no any kind of targets, it's useless, The government, I told you about it, the attraction, of course, of Chinese firm and investment. But there is even, of course, another approach, which is people to people, which is, nevertheless, is important as a whole. And in this field, the number of Chinese tourists and business people choosing Italy as their main travel destination of Europe is growing and growing. And that's important because we are approaching, let's say, our important event, 2015, the Milan Expo. And we are, it's a huge amount of people expecting, let's say, to come to Italy for these events. And the figure we have, it's talking about 1 million of Chinese people expected, let's say, to come for the exhibition. It's a huge amount of people, and that's why we'll try to reorient, which is a question under active debate, let me say this, because it's important as well, our, consular and diplomatic network abroad. I was in the parliament yesterday morning, before, a committee making a public hearings, trying to explain, of course, how important it is for the minister with, the small amount of, resources at our disposal to reorient our foreign policy priorities and try to open new offices and consular sections elsewhere, for example, in China, Chongqing, in Vietnam, and even elsewhere. At the same time, if you are going to open something, you have to close something else. And so that will create some troubles. And of course, people, our nationals living abroad are quite worried about it. And so we have tried to convince the parliament to support the ministry in this action because it's important to be, let's say, proactive towards the change which is changing the world which is changing every day. Globalization is there. It will not waiting for you. It will run, let's say, by itself. You have to run it yourself if you want to catch it. And otherwise, it's a zero-sum game, I would say. This universal exposition will follow the one held in Shanghai in 2010. And China will participate with one of the largest structures, including one institutional and 2 corporate pavilions. The main themes of the event, such as sustainable development, food safety, innovative technologies, represent priorities for the Chinese government as well. The former Italian pavilion at Shanghai Expo now hosts the Shanghai Italian Center, a permanent structure to promote Italian excellence. We deem important to focus on the sectors of urbanization and mobility, as well as environmental sustainability, which offers new opportunities for cooperation. Environment. We appreciate the activities carried out by our 2 countries, and in this respect, I would like to mention especially the importance, that's why it's a success story of this university, which provided training to almost 10,000 Chinese civil servants in the last 10 years. It's a huge amount of people. It's a huge work to be, recognized and acknowledged by everyone. That's important. That's really a success story. But our efforts are not limited, of course, at a national level. In order to consistently and more effectively reinforce our ties with China, we are fully supporting the evolution of the Sino-European dialogue. We cooperate with the relevant European Union institutions to develop a stronger, broader partnership with China. Italy aims at achieving more symmetric relationship throughout the reductions of barriers of different kinds, non-tariff ones, and the protections of intellectual property rights. That's why we welcome the draft mandate approved by the European Commission for the negotiation of an ambitious and a comprehensive agreement on investments between the European Union and China. We attach so great importance to this agreement, which of course we hope will ensure a level playing field for our companies in many sectors and guarantee the protections of investments and investors. Now, I do believe that much more can be achieved and done, of course, in terms of reciprocal investments. That's why the agreement will really contribute to foster investment flows in a final regulatory environment. So it's really a challenge, but that's our first aim. But of course, besides China, as Italians, we have an important tradition of very close relations, we would say, with another giant in the Far East, which is Japan. As part of course, the industrialized world, we can say that Japan is close to Italy both at political level and in terms of shared values. 2016 will mark the 150th anniversary of the establishment of our diplomatic relations with Japan. That's why we are going to celebrate, that's our wish, and we are working strictly with the Japanese government to celebrate probably this, this great event. And it will provide, of course, the opportunity to highlight the excellent level of our cooperation and the long-lasting friendship between Italy and Japan. And that's why, of course, as far as Japan is concerned, I would like to say something about, of course, the Italy-Japan Business Group. which is another important event which will contribute to the bilateral partnership. And I will have the honor to co-chair in Tokyo at the end of October 21st, if I well remember, this meeting. This is an informal organization, no doubt, which has been created, let's say, by national entrepreneurial communities, aims at developing commercial relationships, and annually gathers the most relevant members, of course, of the Italian, the Japanese industries. With Japan, we also share important challenges such as the ones deriving from a high debt to GDP ratio and aging populations, and we converge on most international issues in multilateral fora. To stimulate the economy, the Abe government has identified a set of measures known as Abenomics. We have, an event in the Senate, our Senate, some months ago, focused on this point, on the, on the new Japanese measures taken up by the Japanese government, which is a real combination of fiscal and monetary stimulation, accompanied by structural reforms which compose the so-called three arrows of the plan itself. So far, in the first quarter of 2013, Japanese GDP has grown by 3%, and during the summer, it kept on growing for the third consecutive quarter, even if at a lower pace compared to expectations. During the last couple of decades, our economic partnership has grown both in terms of policy cooperation and in terms of figures. Trade between Italy and Japan, which reached almost 9 billion euros last year, is progressing positively and does not seem to be affected by the global economic crisis. In 2012, Italian exports reached the amount of 5.6 billion euros, increasing by 19.1% compared to 2011. The increase in Italian exports, underlining the reputation of Italian products in Japan, is continuing also in 2013. According to the Japanese Ministry of Finance, in the first half, they reached 3.6 billion euros, increasing by 28% compared to the same period of 2012, showing that the depreciation of the yen resulting from the Abenomics measures has no relevant impact on our products and services. Moreover, Italian exports are increasing more than other European countries' ones, enabling Italy to keep its position as third European Union supplier after Germany and France. This is a very good placement of Italian exports, which is also the result of a structured and comprehensive action carried out by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and by Italian businessmen, which can be, seen by the Italy in Japan exhibition, organized every 2 years by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It includes initiatives promoting cultural, technological, industrial, and scientific made in Italy excellence, and its encouraging success proves the lively interest of the sophisticated Japanese public for Italian art and culture. For Japan as well, the 2015 Expo in Milan represents a unique chance to boost our bilateral relations, considering that the Japanese pavilion will be one of the largest of the exposition itself. A further increase in bilateral trade could stem from the negotiations between the European Union and Japan for a free trade agreement FTA, which started last March. In the field of investments, industrial cooperation and the reciprocal investments are quite satisfactory, with Japanese investments in Italy reaching a peak in $1 billion in 2011. This positive trend, after a sharp decline due to the global, of course, the so-called economic crisis, financial crisis in 2012, seems to be confirmed by the performance of this year's first quarter with $279 million investment flow. I do believe there is a still broad scope for improvement, even in the investment area, and we are committed to identify means to attract more Japanese investment in Italy. Japan thus represents one of the pillars of our relations in the Far East, and we are determined to continue our cooperation both at bilateral and multilateral level, further strengthening our partnership. With such a positive, and finally, let me conclude, even through complex outline I give you, on the future of our relations with the Far East as a whole, and with, above all, the confidence that these university programs can concretely contribute to their strengthening. I wish you all the best for this academic year, and hope that together we will profit the most from this experience at the Venice International University. Thank you again, Ambassador Dani. Thank you, all of you.